What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. All right, moving on to our power rankings. So much more positive this week compared to last week. Like, most of the top teams lost one game, but then won the rest of their games. We did have two teams dropping out. The Philadelphia 76ers, they've lost 5 out of 6. Also, big picture trends here. After their 8-1 start, they're just 22-17. For the season, they're just 10-11 against teams that are 500 or better. So, like, a lot of it has been easy schedule for them in terms of where they're at in the standings. They have a really tough schedule down the stretch this season. And now Joel Embiid is out for an undetermined amount of time due to knee surgery. So obviously, like, we were already starting to see some of these trends form, and now they're in a really tough spot with where they're at with the remaining schedule and with Joel Embiid missing at least a month of that, if not longer. Now, on the Joel Embiid injury front, sounds like it's going to depend entirely on how the surgery goes. Like, it looks like he could be back in time for the playoffs, or he could be done for the season. And in a lot of ways, it kind of simplifies their deadline strategy, because it looked for a while there like they might need to be a little bit more aggressive to try to bring in some firepower. But now there's no need to overpay or to like kind of rush that process. You can kind of take your time with it. Give the keys to Tyrese Maxey. Let him run the show here down the stretch of the season. See what he's got there. Find out more about his development over the course of this stretch when he doesn't have a pick and roll partner the likes of Joel Embiid. It's going to be a hard challenge for him, but you're going to find out a lot more about him and what he can mean for you as a foundational piece, whether or not he's good enough to be your second best player, or if you're better served for him to be your third best player. You can learn a lot. And hell, if you find a good deal around this deadline, you could jump on it, but you don't have to be the desperate team. And that could give them some flexibility. I personally hope Joel Embiid can come back, because I want to see him overcome this playoff challenge that he's been dealing with at this phase of his career. I think he has the potential to be the best player in the world. So I'm hoping that he gets a good outcome from his knee surgery and that he can come back and make a run before the end of the season. But this does simplify some of the urgency surrounding Philly, because it's no longer just like a kind of like a clear runway into the playoffs like you would hope for in a season like this. And then the other team that's dropping out for me is the Indiana Pacers. They've lost 8 of their last 13 games. They've lost 3 in a row against good teams this week. The offense has been mediocre. The defense has been bad. The rebounding has been worse. We'll dive a little bit more into the Pacers here in the next couple of weeks. But the upside there, they've had 187 possessions with Tyrese Haliburton and Pascal Siakam on the floor together. And in those possessions, they are outscoring teams by 16 points per 100 possessions, a 128 offensive rating, which is like insane, off the charts good, and a 113 defensive rating, which is perfectly fine. It's not great, but it's better than what they've been most of this season. So without any further ado, let's get to our power rankings. Number 10, the Sacramento Kings. They finally seem to have gotten over their January slump. They've won 6 out of 7 games, mostly on the road. They're also 9th in defense over that span and 10th in defensive rebounding. There's been a pretty consistent theme this year that when the Sacramento Kings actually commit to the defensive end, they win. It's literally that simple. As a matter of fact, here's a stat for you. When the Kings have held their opponents to 110 or fewer points this year, they are 11-3. And then they are 18-16 in all of their other games. So that's a trend to keep an eye on the rest of the way. Very, very, very much something that I'm sure Mike Brown has been preaching to them throughout the season. Number 9, the Milwaukee Bucks. So after losing to the Jazz last night, Bucks are now 1-3 since Doc Rivers became their head coach. But it's been the offense that's failed them. I actually think their defense, statistically, it's been right where it was before the coaching change, right around a 116 defensive rating. But on tape, I actually am seeing some strides, especially from the guards and just overall commitment. I just think they ran into some bad matchups. Like, Denver's the defending champion. Utah and Portland are super young and have super fast guards, which are like specific matchup issues for Milwaukee. It's the offense that has failed them over this span. They have typically, or they're around a 120 offensive rating. They're at a 114 since Doc Rivers took over. Dame was 5 for 18 again last night. He just continues to just put these really putrid shooting nights up. And so I'm not really worried about their offense in the long run. So I think this is more of just like a brief stretch of offensive slumping alongside with some bad matchups that have kind of caused that 1-3 start under Doc Rivers. I tend to agree with Giannis. I know it's not pretty, but I do think better times are on the horizon for the Bucks. Number 8, the Phoenix Suns rejoining our power rankings. Bradley Beal had 43 last night in a win against the Washington Wizards. He's been in the lineup for 20 straight games now, and the Suns are 14-6 in those games. And they actually won a game against Houston right before that. So they're 15-6 in their last 21 games. Fifth best record in the league over that span. That's a fourth of the season. That's a hefty chunk of games. They are also second in offensive rating over that span and 14th in defense. Pretty respectable there. Defensive rebounding still a little bit of a struggle for them. I think they're 23rd over that span. Devin Booker also fully back to his superstar form. Last 13 games, 32 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists. 54% from the field, 40% from three, and 87% from the line. Number 7, the Oklahoma City Thunder. Had a bad loss in Detroit, and then they dropped a tough one to Minnesota where Anthony Edwards and Karl Towns kind of just out-executed them down the stretch, and their offense stalled against a very, very good Minnesota defense. But they did get back on track against the Nuggets without Jokic. They're actually 3-1 against the Nuggets this year. And then they beat Charlotte and Toronto as well. The Toronto game in particular was encouraging because Chet Holmgren, Josh Giddey, and Lou Dort all kind of got back on track after they'd been slumping for a little while. And Chet in particular has been on track for about 3 games now. He's hit 10 threes in his last 3 games. He's averaging just under 20 points per game, 9 blocks over that span, and double-digit plus-minus in all 3 of those games in terms of the positive. So Chet seems to be getting it back together, got over that little slump that he was dealing with there in January. Number 6, the Cleveland Cavaliers. Undefeated week. Lighter stretch of their schedule, but they did on Monday notch a big win over against the Clippers. Really, really good defensive effort. Really contained Paul George well, really contained James Harden well, got out in transition. We did a whole deep dive, not just on that game, but on everything going on with the Cavs with Carter Rodriguez from the Chase Down podcast last week on Wednesday. Went for like 45 minutes. It was a long pod. We did a lot of deep dive analysis on the Cleveland Cavaliers. So make sure you check that out a little bit further back on our feed. Number 5, the Minnesota Timberwolves. So Chris Finch got on them the other night after losing to Orlando, talking about forming some bad habits and behaving like a 500 team. And if you zoom out, they're like, it's actually kind of funny because I actually look at this as like classic coaching, just like really good motivational coaching, trying to like just stay on his team. Because you got to think like Minnesota's been outstanding all season. And they have some specific things that bode really well for them for the postseason. They have a huge front line. They're an elite defensive team. They've got a tier 1 superstar or at least a guy who could be a tier 1 superstar in Anthony Edwards that is pretty much unguardable in terms of getting to his spots. It's primarily decision making and settling for him. He's got a little bit of the Jason Tatum-itis where it's like he is the best athlete on the floor, but just takes a million pull-up jump shots and he's not particularly efficient with them. But like really, it's been mostly good. And I think what happens is you end up in a stretch like this where it's late January, early February, you drop a couple games you shouldn't have lost, right? Like they lost to Charlotte, that shouldn't happen. Losing to Orlando at home probably shouldn't happen. Losing to San Antonio probably shouldn't happen. But they've been really, really good. They were really good against a tough schedule for a month before that. This is just classic coaching. Got to stay on top of your guys. Got to keep them motivated. Make them feel like they're in danger even when they're not. And that's the best way to get a group to kind of do what the Clippers are doing, which is just attack every single regular season game to maintain their habits. One concern, their offense kind of fell apart again late in the game against Orlando. Now, like part of that's Orlando has this ridiculous defensive punch. And when they really lock in, they can be tough to score on. But zoom out. So one of my biggest concerns for the Timberwolves all season has been their late game execution. They are 27th in fourth quarter offensive rating this season. It's been a major point of concern for me in terms of their playoff potential. Number 4, the New York Knicks. Injuries ended their 9-game winning streak against the Los Angeles Lakers, who actually have been playing some decent basketball as of late. Julius Randle hurt his shoulder. Then OG Anunoby had some elbow inflammation. I actually have a funny story about this. When I was living in Charlotte, so this would have been like 2017, I will never forget, we played in like a men's league game, and the game went fine. There was no issue, but I woke up the next morning and I went to the gym to go shooting. And I start my shooting workout just going around the world, just like shooting from block to block to the foul line. It's just a way to kind of like warm up my elbow. And like I went to shoot from the elbow and I just felt this like excruciating pain in my right elbow. And it ended up turning into this huge deal. I had to wear like a brace for a while. It was like really bad inflammation. I think it might have actually been tennis elbow, but like It was gnarly, and it like straight up made me stop playing basketball for like a couple of weeks. So like when I saw that, I was like, oh, I hope OG's not dealing with what I had back when I was in Charlotte, because that like legit messed with my jump shot for like the better part of like 6 months to a year. So I'm hopeful that they just get in front of that and just let his elbow, whatever that inflammation is, subside, because it's more important for him to be ready to go for the postseason. I think we've already seen enough from this stretch since OG Anunoby joined the team to know that they've got a real physical imposition that they can bring to the table, that they are a real playoff threat. So there's no reason to force it back. Take your time, get healthy. Jalen Brunson, last 10 games, by the way, 33 points per game, 4 rebounds, and 7 assists on 52 37, 84 splits. So Jalen Brunson playing at a superstar level right now. He's phenomenal in that Lakers game, was drawing crazy double teams. That was the only way the Lakers won, was basically just a gimmick defense, getting the ball out of his hands, as obviously New York was playing with lesser players. But he was incredible down the stretch of the Indiana Pacers game as well. Kind of insane how much of a hit Jalen Brunson was as a free agent signing, and how it changed really the fortunes of that franchise. Number 3, the Boston Celtics. Couple hard-fought wins against the Pelicans and Pacers, and then they drop a game to the Lakers without LeBron James and Anthony Davis. And offense has been the main issue in their losses. A 105 offensive rating against Milwaukee, a 99 offensive rating against the Clippers, a 109 offensive rating against the Lakers. And the big thing here is they've just leaned into variance. They're attaching the fate of their season to variance. They attempt 43 threes per 100 possessions. That is by far the most in the league. And when they go in, they beat the hell out of you. And when they're not going in, they can be beat. And it's I just would like to see them add a little bit more variety to the way that they attack, instead of leaning so heavily on drive and kick basketball and just hunting 3-point shots whenever they can, just because I think it would give them a little bit more offensive resilience. And I would look at some of these down offensive games, especially against quality opponents, as part of the concern there, because it's very clear that shooting is contagious for Boston. When they lose their confidence, when teams can kind of get them into one of those rough shooting nights, they kind of sulk, and it almost gets worse for them from there. And like having another punch you can go to is actually a great way to mitigate a rough shooting night. If you can lean into a different offensive identity, whether it's heavy Jason Tatum in the post, or whether it's going to Porzingis in the post, or leaning more into pick and pop basketball with Porzingis to try to get more advantage situations, like getting out of just leaning on just drive and kick threes and tough transition threes, making it so that you have less variance could go a long way towards helping them have a little bit more resilience in those matchups. Number 2, the Denver Nuggets. Dropped a game to Oklahoma City without Jokic, but they had an undefeated week outside of that. Another classic crunch time game against Milwaukee. They completely out-executed them down the stretch, despite Doc Rivers throwing some pretty smart defensive coverages at them to try to mitigate their advantages. The Nuggets now have the best clutch net rating in the league. They're outscoring opponents by 23 points per 100 possessions when the game is within 5 with less than 5 minutes left. Specifically on the defensive end, they have been the very best clutch defense in the league this year. And then last but not least, number 1, the Los Angeles Clippers. They dropped a tough game on the road to that red-hot Cavs team like we talked about earlier, but they bounced back and won the rest of their games. The Clippers, in my opinion, this season, to this point here at February 5th, have showed the best combination of talent and basketball character that I've seen this year. What that means is actual firepower on the roster and commitment to the details from start to finish this season. And I'm not just talking about like playing hard. I'm even talking about playing smart, leaning into their strengths, practicing the things that will lead them home at the end of the day. I've been so incredibly impressed by the Clippers. It's starting to look like it's starting to look like it's their year in a lot of ways. And at this point, I think they belong at number 1 in the power rankings. I'm like this close to moving them into that top tier of contenders with Boston and Denver. It's just been a hell of a year for the Los Angeles Clippers.